The convoy had been parked outside for 20 minutes. No one inside St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital knew why, except for her. 4 matte black armored personnel carriers and a pair of sand-colored Humvees sat idling on the rain-slicked asphalt of the main boulevard, their engines a low, guttural thrum that vibrated through the hospital's foundations. They held their position like ancient, sleeping beasts, lights off, their angular silhouettes cutting stark shapes against the dreary, weeping sky of the city. Traffic was at a standstill for 3 blocks in every direction, a chorus of angry horns that couldn't penetrate the vehicle's armored hides. Inside the emergency department, the chaos was of a more familiar sort, a Friday night bleed-out, where the city's worth of bad luck, bad decisions, and bad blood washed up on their shores. Nurse Alara Vance moved through it all like a ghost, a whisper of gray scrubs and quiet efficiency. They thought she was just a nurse. They were dead wrong. Alara was a study in deliberate quietude. She never raised her voice, never hurried. Yet she was always precisely where she was needed most, a moment before the need became critical. Her colleagues, a frantic constellation of doctors, residents, and other nurses, orbited the pandemonium. They shouted for crash carts, barked medication orders, and sprinted down linoleum hallways. Alara simply materialized. One moment she was logging vitals on a terminal, her expression as placid as a still lake. The next she was at the side of a coding patient, her hands already prepped, passing a pre-filled syringe of epinephrine to the flustered resident before he had even finished asking for it. This preternatural calm was often mistaken for detachment, her silence for a lack of engagement. New staff found it unnerving. The veterans had simply accepted it as part of the ER's ecosystem, like the constant, sterile scent of antiseptic and the faint, metallic tang of blood. They called her the Gray Ghost, a name spoken with a mixture of mild irritation and grudging respect. She did her job, worked doubles without complaint, and faded back into the hospital's background radiation the moment she was no longer required. Her appearance reinforced this perception of unremarkable stillness. She was of average height, with a lean, wiry frame that her loose-fitting scrubs did little to define. Her hair was a simple brown, pulled back in a tight, functional bun that allowed no stray strands to escape. Her face was pale, almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights, dominated by large, observant eyes the color of a stormy sea. They missed nothing. There was a single, defining feature that broke the canvas of her quiet ordinariness, a jagged, silvered scar that ran from the inside of her left wrist up to her elbow. It was a puckered, ugly thing, a roadmap of old trauma. When a new intern had once, foolishly, asked about it, she had simply looked at him with those unreadable eyes and said in her soft, low voice, "A kitchen accident." The tone, though gentle, had carried a finality that brooked no further questions. The story became hospital lore, a cautionary tale about a nasty run-in with a bread slicer or a pot of boiling oil. It made her seem more normal, more vulnerable, and ultimately more forgettable. Foreshadowing of the woman beneath the scrubs was rare, fleeting as a heat shimmer on a summer road. It came in moments of extreme pressure, glimpses of a different programming running deep beneath the surface. Months earlier, a catastrophic multi-vehicle pile-up on the interstate had flooded the ER with bodies. While doctors screamed triage tags and chaos reigned, Alara had stood for a full 10 seconds at the entrance to the ambulance bay, her eyes scanning the arriving wounded not with a nurse's compassion, but with the cold, analytical geometry of a battlefield commander. She processed the data, blast patterns on a crushed sedan, that suggested an eyed more than a simple collision. The peculiar distribution of shrapnel wounds on one victim, the powder burns on another. Her gaze had briefly met that of a grizzled ex-army paramedic who was bagging a patient. He saw what was in her eyes, the same look he had seen in Special Forces operators in Kandahar, an immediate, instinctual assessment of threat, casualty, and tactical priority. He saw it, and he said nothing, his own expression hardening with a silent, profound understanding. He just gave her a short, sharp nod, a gesture she returned before her face softened back into the mask of the quiet nurse. The catalyst arrived at 9:17 p.m., heralded not by sirens, but by the reek of expensive cologne and entitlement. Mr. Alistair Sterling, chairman of the board of Sterling Conglomerates and the hospital's single largest benefactor, swept into the ER flanked by two bodyguards built like granite outcroppings. Sterling was a man whose wealth had insulated him from inconvenience for so long that he now regarded it as a personal affront. He had a small, clean laceration on his thumb, the result of a mishandled antique letter opener, and he was treating it with the gravity of a battlefield amputation. He bypassed the waiting room, his expensive leather shoes squeaking with indignation on the polished floor, and marched directly to the main nursing station, demanding immediate attention. Someone needs to see to this now. He boomed, holding up his thumb as if it were a severed limb. The charge nurse, flustered, tried to explain the triage process, that there were more critical patients. Sterling was having none of it. His eyes, small and porcine, scanned the bustling trauma bays until they landed on Alara. She was in Trauma Bay 3, calmly and methodically cleaning a deep, infected wound on the leg of a homeless man who had been brought in by police. The man was delirious with fever, muttering incoherently, the smell of neglect and cheap liquor hanging heavy in the air around him. Alara worked with a focused tenderness, ignoring the stench, speaking to the man in a low, soothing tone, even though he was unlikely to understand. To Sterling, this was an outrage. He strode over, his bodyguards trailing him like sullen shadows. "You," he barked, his voice cutting through the bay. Alara didn't look up immediately. She finished applying a sterile dressing before slowly turning her head, her gray eyes meeting his. "Are you deaf?" Sterling sneered. "I have been waiting. Do you have any idea who I am? And you are wasting your time with this filth." He gestured dismissively at the unconscious man on the gurney. "Your priorities are a disgrace. People like him are a drain on the system. People like me fund this system. Now, you will leave him and attend to me." The injustice of it hung in the air, thick and poisonous. His attack was not just on her actions, but on her very ethos as a caregiver. It was a public humiliation, a declaration that his money made his minor discomfort more important than another man's life. Alara's expression remained unchanged, a mask of professional neutrality. But inside, something cold and ancient stirred. She looked from Sterling's furious, pampered face to the sick man on the gurney, then back. "This patient is septic and requires immediate care," she stated, her voice soft but with an undercurrent of unyielding steel. "You will be seen when a doctor is available. Please have a seat in the waiting area." Sterling's face purpled with rage. He was not a man who was told to wait. "You insolent little, who do you think you are?" He turned to one of his bodyguards, a hulking man with a cold professional demeanor and a visible disdain for the entire situation. "This was Kale. Get her name," Sterling spat. "Then get me Dr. Evans. I want her fired. I want her out of this hospital by midnight." I will not have my generosity thrown back in my face by some plain little do-gooder with a hero complex. The hospital administrator, Dr. Evans, was a man whose spine was made of gelatin. When summoned by Sterling, he practically scuttled into the ER, his face a mask of panicked sycophancy. He listened to Sterling's tirade, throwing worried, apologetic glances at the benefactor. He never once looked at Alara. The decision was made before Sterling even finished his rant. The hospital could not afford to lose his funding. Alara was a good nurse, yes, but nurses were replaceable. Billion-dollar donations were not. She was called into Evans's office 20 minutes later. The conversation was brief and humiliating. She was accused of insubordination and unprofessional conduct. Her dismissal was effective at the end of her shift. She was to clear out her locker and be off the premises by 1 a.m. Alara accepted the verdict with the same stoicism she accepted everything else. She simply nodded, said, "I understand," and walked out. Evans misinterpreted her calm acceptance as weakness, as the resignation of someone who knew she was powerless. He felt a pang of something that might have been guilt, but quickly smothered it with the comforting thought of Sterling's next 7-figure check. Alara spent the next few hours working as she always did, flawlessly. She was a ghost, moving from patient to patient, her hands sure, her presence calming. No one would have known she had just been fired. She was documenting the last of her patient notes when the first alarm blared. It was the fire alarm, a shrieking, insistent pulse. But the accompanying automated announcement was what pricked her instincts. Attention. A hazardous material situation has been reported in the East Wing. Please evacuate immediately. A gas leak. But the air smelled of nothing but antiseptic and floor wax. It was a lie. Her body went rigid. Her head came up, her gray eyes scanning the corridor, not for fire, but for threats. The chaos was immediate, but it was the wrong kind of chaos. It wasn't the panicked scramble of a genuine emergency. It was controlled. Men in dark tactical gear, not firefighter uniforms, moved with swift, predatory grace through the hallways. They carried suppressed submachine guns and moved in coordinated stacks of 2 and 4. They were professionals. At the head of the lead team was Kyle, Sterling's bodyguard, his face now cold and impassive, a tool for a job. This wasn't about a fired nurse. This was something else. Sterling had used his tantrum as a cover. They were here for a patient. A very specific patient. In the VIP suite at the end of the hall, a whistleblower scheduled to testify against Sterling's corporation was recovering from a minor surgery. Sterling wasn't just a bully. He was a criminal. A short burst of suppressed gunfire echoed from down the hall. A scream was cut short. Alara's training, buried for 5 years under layers of sterile procedure and quiet routine, surged to the surface. The nurse was gone. In her place stood the operator. Her movements became sharper, more economical. She flattened herself against a wall, her mind a supercomputer processing angles, exits, and enemy positions. She saw Sergeant Jake Renner, an off-duty Army Ranger she'd chatted with earlier while he visited his friend, get caught in the open. He tried to shield a pair of fleeing nurses, pushing them into a room. A burst from a mercenary's weapon stitched across his thigh. He went down, clutching the wound, his face a mask of pain and fury. The mask dropped. Alara's placid expression dissolved, replaced by a look of glacial, lethal focus. She moved. She didn't run, she flowed from one shadow to the next. She reached Renner, who was trying to drag himself to cover behind a large potted plant. He looked up, saw her face, and his breath hitched. The soft, kind eyes of the nurse he'd spoken to hours ago were gone. In their place were the eyes of a wolf, ancient and cold and appraising. "Stay down, Sergeant," she commanded. Her voice was no longer the gentle alto he remembered. It was a low, hard rasp, the sound of gravel grinding under a tank tread. "Keep pressure on that wound." She didn't wait for an answer. 2 mercenaries were advancing down the hall, their weapons sweeping the area. Alara slipped into an empty supply closet. She scanned the contents: saline bags, bandages, bedpans, and, on a crash cart tucked in the corner, a defibrillator. She grabbed the paddles. The mercenaries passed the closet. She exploded out of the doorway behind them. Before the rear man could even register her presence, she slammed a paddle against the side of his helmeted head, the plastic cracking on impact. He staggered. She didn't hesitate. She drove the heel of her other hand up under his chin, snapping his head back with a sickening crunch of vertebrae. He dropped without a sound. The second mercenary spun around, his weapon coming up. He was fast. She was faster. She dropped, sweeping his legs out from under him. As he fell, she was already on top of him, one hand grabbing the barrel of his submachine gun and wrenching it away, the other driving 2 stiff fingers into the pressure point beneath his jaw, a brachial stun. His entire body convulsed, his weapon clattering to the floor. She scooped it up, the cold, familiar weight of the MP7 settling into her hands as if it were a long-lost limb. She checked the magazine, flicked the selector to single fire, and melted back into the shadows. It had taken less than 4 seconds. From his position on the floor, Sergeant Renner watched, his jaw slack with disbelief. He had seen elite soldiers in action. He had never seen anything like this. It was a ballet of violence, executed with an inhuman calm and a terrifying efficiency. The woman he'd thought was just a kind nurse moved like a phantom, a creature of pure, distilled lethality. Her former colleagues, huddled in locked patient rooms and behind overturned desks, saw flashes of the battle. They saw a gray shape flit across a corridor. They heard the muffled cough of a suppressed weapon, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. They saw the arrogant Dr. Evans peeking out from his office, his face white as a sheet, as Alara disarmed a 3rd mercenary with a brutal, close-quarters maneuver that ended with her driving the man's own combat knife into the femoral artery of his partner. Evans scrambled back from the door, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. The mousy, disposable nurse was hunting these trained killers through the halls of his hospital. The power dynamic of the entire world had just been inverted. Kyle, coordinating his team from the nursing station, realized the situation had spiraled. He'd lost contact with 3 of his men. He heard a 4th scream, a choked-off gurgle over the comms. "We have an unidentified hostile," he hissed into his radio. Engaged, highly skilled, all units converge on the East Wing Junction. Full auto authorized. He looked at the security monitors. He saw a flicker of gray in one of the camera feeds, a ghost with his men's weapons. He had planned for hospital security, for a slow police response. He had not planned for this. He had not planned for her. Meanwhile, outside, the city's impotent rage had been replaced by a stunned, fearful silence. The convoy remained, a silent testament to an authority far beyond that of the local police. A single figure detached himself from the lead vehicle. He was tall, ramrod straight, his uniform crisp and adorned with the stars of a lieutenant general. It was Marcus Thorne. His face was a granite carving of command, his eyes holding the weight of decades spent making life or death decisions. He strode toward the hospital's main entrance, his polished boots clicking on the wet pavement with the finality of a judge's gavel. The two overwhelmed police officers at the door made a move to stop him. He didn't even break his stride. He simply fixed them with a look, a gaze that had made colonels tremble, and they stepped aside as if pushed by an invisible force. He walked to the main reception desk where a terrified clerk was hiding. "I am General Marcus Thorne, United States Army," he announced, his voice not loud, but a deep, resonant baritone that filled the cavernous lobby and demanded absolute attention. "I am here for one of my people. Her name is Alara Vance. Her call sign is Ghost. I will wait here as long as it takes." Inside the besieged wing, Kyle had finally cornered his prey. Alara and the wounded Renner were pinned down in an old records room, the heavy wooden door their only cover. Kyle's remaining two men laid down a steady stream of suppressive fire, chewing splinters from the doorframe. "You're good, whoever you are," Kyle shouted over the din, "but you're one person. And you're trapped. Throw out your weapon and come out with your hands up. Maybe I'll even let the soldier live." Alara was assessing her options. 1 magazine left, 1 exit, 2, maybe 3 hostiles. The odds were long, but not impossible. She was preparing to breach when a new voice, amplified and impossibly calm, crackled through the dead mercenary's radio on her belt. Then it echoed through the entire hospital as Thorne's team commandeered the public address system. "Ghost, this is Sunray. Stand down. Repeat, stand down. We have the perimeter. The package is secure. Acknowledge." Kale froze. His finger went slack on the trigger. Sunray, Ghost, those weren't random words. They were call signs. Deep black, Tier 1 call signs from the kind of units that were officially denied to exist. His blood ran cold. He wasn't fighting a rogue security guard or a cop, he was fighting a legend. The realization dawned on him with the force of a physical blow. He was a dead man. Alara keyed the radio, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion, the perfect professional report. "Sunray, this is Ghost. Acknowledged, we have 1 friendly WIA, multiple hostiles, neutralized. Section is secure. I am Code 7. Code 7, off-duty but engaged. The silence that followed was absolute. Then came the thunder of heavy boots. Thorne's Special Forces team, clad in the most advanced tactical gear, swept through the wing with overwhelming force and precision. They moved like a single organism, clearing rooms, securing Kyle and his terrified remaining men without firing a single shot. They cuffed them with a brutal efficiency that spoke of endless practice. General Thorne found Alara in the records room. The operator was gone again. The nurse had returned. She was kneeling beside Sergeant Renner, her hands, now gentle once more, expertly applying a tourniquet to his bleeding leg, her soft voice murmuring reassurances. The captured MP7 lay on the floor beside her, looking utterly alien in the context of her current actions. Thorne's hard face softened as he looked at her. The hospital staff, including a pasty-faced Dr. Evans and a trembling Mr. Sterling, who had been found hiding in a linen closet, were herded into the corridor by Thorne's men. They stared, dumbfounded, at the scene. Thorne stepped forward, his presence commanding the space. He looked at Alara, then at the stunned, silent crowd of her former colleagues. "For 5 years," he began, his voice a low rumble of profound authority, "we have been looking for her. We honored her request to disappear, to try and find a peace she had more than earned, but we always kept a distant watch. He looked directly at Dr. Evans and Mr. Sterling. "You know her as Nurse Alara Vance. A quiet, efficient employee. Someone you felt you could dismiss, someone you could threaten." He took a step closer to her, his gaze filled with a deep paternal respect. "I know her as Captain Alara Vance, call sign Ghost. Lead operator for Task Force Nomad. A unit so far off the books that even most of the intelligence community believes it's a myth. She is, without exaggeration, a national hero." He pointed to the silvery scar on her arm, the one they had all dismissed as a kitchen accident. "She got that scar in the Zabul province of Afghanistan, holding the flank of a compromised position against 40 insurgents. Single-handedly. That shrapnel is from an RPG that detonated 3 feet from her. She took that hit and kept fighting for another hour, saving her entire team. My team. Saving my life." A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The mundane scar was transformed into a medal of honor, her quietness no longer shyness but the heavy silence of someone who carried the ghosts of 100 secret battlefields. Her weariness was not from long shifts, but from the weight of a nation's darkest duties. Thorne's gaze, now as cold and hard as polar ice, settled on Alistair Sterling. "The men you hired," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "have been identified. Their handler has already given you up. Your attempt to silence a federal witness by staging an attack on this hospital has failed. As of 5 minutes ago, by presidential order, all your assets have been frozen. You are charged with conspiracy, aggravated assault, and multiple counts of domestic terrorism." Sterling sputtered, his face a blotchy mess of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this. I am Alistair Sterling. I build wings for this hospital. I am a pillar of this community." Thorne didn't even blink. He looked at Sterling as if he were a bug. "You were a man with money," he corrected him, his voice laced with contempt. "You used that money to threaten a woman who has sacrificed more for this country than you could possibly comprehend. You picked a fight with a living legend to soothe your pathetic, bruised ego. You are no longer important." He gave a curt nod to 2 of his soldiers, who stepped forward and hauled Sterling away, his protests dissolving into pathetic squeals. Thorne then turned his chilling gaze on Dr. Evans. "As for you," he said, his voice flat, "your cowardly capitulation in the face of a rich man's tantrum and your gross negligence in the security of your facility have been noted. I imagine your resignation will be on the governor's desk by sunrise. If not, I will make a phone call to ensure it is." Evans looked like he was going to be sick, his career and reputation dissolving before his eyes. A profound silence fell over the corridor, broken only by the quiet weeping of the disgraced administrator. All eyes were on Alara. The quiet nurse. The gray ghost. The hero. Then, one of the younger nurses, the one Alara had shielded earlier, began to clap. It was a hesitant, solitary sound. Then, Sergeant Renner, gritting his teeth against the pain, began to clap, his hand striking the linoleum floor. The ex-Army paramedic joined in, his applause loud and booming. Soon, the entire corridor was filled with a thunderous ovation. The nurses, the doctors, the orderlies, all of them, looking at the woman they had worked beside for years, but had never truly seen. They were applauding not just her actions that night, but her entire hidden life of sacrifice. They were applauding with awe, with shame for their ignorance, and with a deep, abiding respect. Alara did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply absorbed the sound, her expression one of immense, profound weariness. She gave a single, small, tired nod of acknowledgement. Her war was finally over. Thorn moved to her side and placed a heavy, gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's time to come home, Captain," he said softly, his voice for her alone. She rose, her movements fluid and graceful, and allowed him to escort her down the hallway. She walked past the clapping staff, past the wreckage of her brief, quiet life, and out into the rain-washed night. She didn't look back. The doors of the lead armored vehicle opened for her, and she climbed inside, disappearing into the dark, protected interior. She was leaving the world of mundane pains and returning to the world of shadows she had been born to inhabit. The convoy's engines roared to life, a synchronized chorus of power, and they pulled away from the curb, melting into the city traffic as if they had never been there. They left behind a hospital that would forever be marked by the events of that night. They left behind a group of people whose understanding of the world had been irrevocably altered. They learned that the quietest people often carry the heaviest burdens. They learned that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. And they learned that heroes are not just figures in stories or on monuments. Sometimes, they are the quiet nurse you see every day, the one whose name you can't quite remember, the gray ghost who walks among you, waiting for the one moment she is needed most. They would never forget her name again.